The following is a conversation. It has the features of any conversation, such as imperfectly expressed thoughts, ill-considered opinions, and the notions of several sleep-deprived brains. Try not to get your stethoscope in a twist about it.
David, do you have cats on your shirt?
Yeah, man.
Who are literally in the cat's pajamas right now. How about that?
I'm a cat daddy. Something that I never was until I was in my early 50s. Never had pets before. And now I have two precious little babies.
The lights of your life. Are they obese? Or are they little?
Not yet.
Dang.
That's a very American thing. We do like our pets to be obese.
Mine is very obese, yeah.
Oh.
Well, he's not. He's big bone. He's over. Yeah, he's a mix of a Maine Coon, I think. So I think that adds some. I think
they're
he is
big.
A mix.
Yeah, they can be big.
It's a huge cat.
Yeah.
It is the American standard that our pets are very much so overweight. I don't know why we just like them chunky.
Because it's so much easier to hold.
It's like a weighted blanket, you know?
It's harder for them to run away.
We'll just have a podcast about cats.
Meandering in the margins of medicine, it's the Shortcoat Podcast.
Weird news,
fresh views,
helpful clues, and interviews.
By students, for students.
Subscribe to our weekly show at theshortcoat.com.
Welcome back to the Shortcoat Podcast. It's the show that gives you an inside look at medical school from the students drinking from that fire hose. A production of the University of Iowa Carver College of Medicine. I'm Dave Etler. With me in the SCP studio, she is a fearless prophet wielding her intellect like a sword to reveal the heart of each discussion. It's M1 Hend Al-Kalani.
Damn. Wow.
His voice is like the music of the celestial spheres. It's M3 AJ Chowdhury joining us from the internet.
Thank you for the virtual consult.
He is a cunning and enigmatic trickster, eager to grant your incautiously formulated wish. It's M1 Jeff Goddard.
Careful what you wish for, Cloud.
She comes bearing gifts from her lips to your ears. It's M1 Ervina. Oh, I forgot to ask you. Tabakovic?
Tabakovich.
Tabakovich.
Yeah, that's good.
Welcome to the show for your first time. And if you thought that was all shortcuts, then I find your lack of faith disturbing. We're joined today by a special guest, University of Iowa Hospitals and Clinics Interfaith Chaplain David Kozishek.
Well done.
Okay, good.
Well done.
Good. David, welcome to the Shortcoat.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
Our topic today is the intersections between faith and healthcare. I think of this in two ways, personally. First, exploring how healthcare professionals can effectively recognize and accommodate the diverse religious beliefs of their patients. And second, examining how medical practitioners who themselves are faithful integrate and harmonize their beliefs with their medical practice. I've always wanted to talk about this on the show because it's a crucial aspect of many people's lives, but I'm not religious myself, so I never really felt like I knew enough or had enough wherewithal myself to lead the discussion, which is why when Hend volunteered to take on this topic, I was really excited. Plus, it meant that I get to sort of sit back and relax a little bit. So I appreciate that, Hend. Thanks.
Yeah, I'm really excited for this. I think starting medical school is a time, if not any other time, to start thinking critically about what you grew up with or things that you see are very important in other people's lives that maybe you aren't familiar with. And I feel like any big life event like starting medical school or anything like that is a time to start thinking about this kind of stuff.
I mean, the whole goal of medical school isn't just to make you pass your boards or exams. It's to get you to start thinking like a physician. And part of that is trying to figure out like who you are and what you're becoming and where you want to go with it. So
yeah, I think there's so many different ways to approach this kind of topic. I wasn't sure where to start, and really the only training, well, it was great, but the only training we've had so far was a lecture in our first semester about the role of chaplains at the University of Iowa and the integral part they play in the healthcare team. So to talk about that, I wanted to invite you, David, on the show, and to start off this discussion, ask you about your role as part of the healthcare team. I think that a lot of our listeners, and I feel like the majority of medical students as well coming in, are not familiar with the role that you play. So can you tell us a little bit about your role?
I sure can. Thanks for the question. I'll start with myself. I work primarily in surgical and neuroscience intensive care unit, and I'm also part-time on the adult palliative care team. And we have, I think, well, I should have checked before I came, 12 chaplains now, I think, for the whole hospital, including denominational chaplains. There's 2 that are Catholic priests, and they see just Catholic patients, mainly for sacramental needs. That's why the Catholic Church has 2 people here to meet Catholics' needs. The rest of us are interfaith, which means we're here for everyone else. We're here for Catholics too, if need be. But we're here for anyone and everyone, no matter what their background is, if they have a religion, if they don't, if they're not sure, if they don't believe at all in any kind of God or afterlife or any kind of a religious faith. It doesn't matter to us as chaplains. We're here for everyone to meet their deepest human needs in what is often a crisis situation for them. If they end up at the university hospital, they're sick. So sickness of any kind usually helps us to pause and really think about the deep questions in life. So that's what we're here to help people with.
I assume that a patient requests somebody to come and talk with them. How does that usually come to you? And do you run right over and how does it actually work?
Yeah, there's several ways that we get information about who wants to see a chaplain. I could go a couple different ways with this. The real practical aspect is we can either get a consult order that's put in by a physician or a provider, and that we take a little more seriously as far as urgency. We're on call. Someone is always on call on the pager.
Yeah, you're on call right now, basically.
I have 2 hours off of on call right now, so I can be here. But yes, today's my day for on call, so that can take us anywhere. So on call is the priority, and then consult orders would be the next priority, and then screening requests. When patients are admitted here to University Hospital, they're asked, would you like to see a chaplain? And if they say yes, they end up in our database for people who do want to see a chaplain. And those are divided up in various ways.
And so do you...
Sorry.
That's okay.
Speaking of on-call. Okay. It's nothing I need to do anything about, thankfully.
When you get these requests, what do you know about the patient?
Very little, usually. We do chart on patients, so we have access to patients' medical records through Epic. I can't speak for other chaplains. I try not to go right to the chart to figure out what's going on with them, because that can bias me in various ways. We can talk about, medicine versus maybe the more humanistic elements of healthcare in that regard. So I try not to fill my head too much with what's already been charted on them medically, unless I'm kind of stymied as to why I'm getting called in, then I might look at the chart. But otherwise, we do have a listing of whatever their religious preference is, if they have one. However, that's often inaccurate. When they're registered, a lot of things happen quickly all at once, and a lot of times that information isn't accurate. So it might give me a clue, it might not. So in the end, it's really, I meet the person, try to figure out where they're at, what's going on, who they are. Do they have a religious preference? Do they not? Questions like that.
I'd love to learn any advice you have and advice that you give providers in general. So in school, we're given a lot of recommendations and advice for learning how to build a relationship with a patient. And in your role, you're doing that in a high intensity environment about something very personal to the patient, and they've just met you. So How do you approach that? What kind of skills do you use to build that relationship?
Yeah, I would say the most important skill is self-awareness. So a lot of our training in chaplaincy, and if that's of interest, I can talk a little bit about what that is.
Sure, yeah.
But self-awareness is a big part of it. We are really educated in how to be aware of our own stuff, so that when I'm meeting somebody for the first time, I'm not just coming at that person with my own belief system or values or communication style, anything like that. So self-awareness is one skill. Non-judgmental presence, I guess I would say, is another one. A lot of times people, if they have some sense of what a chaplain is, if they're not comfortable with a chaplain, it may be because they feel like they're going to be judged by the chaplain. Because unfortunately, a lot of people have a history of being judged by religious figures. So what I want to do is walk into their room, be very respectful, be very open and curious, non-judgmental, aware of what's going on with me, and then just enter into conversation as much or as little as that person wants. So a lot depends on the circumstances. There could be family there. They could be providers coming and going. But yeah, does that answer the question?
And is your role in those situations, when I think of religion, I often think of ritual and all that kind of stuff. And I don't imagine that an interfaith chaplain spends a lot of time on ritual as much as they do on, I don't know, counseling? Is that the right way to think of it?
Yeah, I wouldn't use the word counseling. We're not trained to do counseling as such. So we're careful about making that distinction, that boundary. And we do rituals. We can provide rituals if that's something that the person finds helpful and comforting and meaningful. But that's not our go-to first.
Yeah, you don't run right in and start.
Yeah.
You know, if you happen to know that they're Catholic, you don't start flinging holy water or whatever. Yeah. Okay. That makes sense.
Right.
Makes a lot of sense. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, you want to find out what they need, right?
Right. Right. Yeah. And, you know, some religions are more ritual based than others. So,
yeah.
Yeah. So the main thing that we do is we take people where they're at. We try to figure out, you know, what makes life meaningful for them. How is that being challenged right now because of their illness, if it is? How do they find purpose in life? What are their major connections, their relationships? Is it family? Is it friends? Do they have a connection to some higher power of some sort? Things like that, just to try to figure out who they are and what's important to them so that we can help them draw on their strengths to help cope with the illness. And on occasion, we'll lift up something that we see that might be actually causing more distress to them because of their beliefs, whatever that might be.
Shortcoats, if you're enjoying our conversation today, I'd be grateful if you'd let people know by posting a story on Instagram or Facebook or tweeting about us. And don't forget to tag us in your post.
Thank you.
Are there any stories that come to mind or any specific patients that come to mind where you could have seen how the role of a chaplain really majorly improved their outcomes?
Yeah, there are stories. I'll try to think of one that isn't real current. I don't like to use current examples. I'll use one that I used in the lecture for M1s this last fall. And that was in another hospital in another state. On a behavioral health unit, a young woman had been admitted with bipolar disorder, and she was definitely in a manic phase and really caught up in all kinds of religious ideation. She happened to be Catholic, and she had a lot of religious ideation kind of convoluted with her past work as a Mary Kay salesperson. I won't go into how that all fit together, but she was suffering. Her mind was going 1,000 miles an hour. She was just suffering so much with that, but didn't really realize it because of the illness. And the message I got as a chaplain was that she was non-compliant. That
the old non-compliant.
That golden word, non-compliant, with her medication regimen. So that's why she was in such a manic phase at the time. So when she talked, she was one, oh boy, was she happy to see me. Oh, the chaplain will understand this. So she talked quickly and at length about some of her beliefs and signs that she was seeing everywhere. And at one point, she talked about having been at Mass, Catholic Mass, and seeing the priest carrying the gospel book down the aisle at the beginning of Mass. And the gospel book was divided on the front cover, divided into quarters, with in each corner of the cover of the book was one of the gospel writers. So that sparked her imagination. And then she said she got to that hospital, and sat down with her doctor who was trying to help her. And the doctor was trying to explain what was going on with her from her illness perspective. And he drew on a piece of paper a cross so it divided the paper into 4 sections.
Oh boy.
That was so meaningful to her, so meaningful to her. But in a religious and spiritual sense, so she kind of took off again on a tangent about what that meant, and really not, in my mind, making a lot of sense, but it was just so significant to her. So at one point I just stopped her. I said, "Oh, I'm surprised that you're saying this. I thought you were going to tell me that meant that God is working through your doctor." And she just stopped. For the first time, she stopped talking. "I never thought of it that way," she said. And long story short, that shifted everything for her. She was able to cooperate with the doctor's plan for her, with her medication regimen, and she was able to be released from the hospital after some time, of course. But I use that as an example because we can come in with what we call pastoral or spiritual authority. We're a religious figure in some ways, so people can look to us as having that kind of authority, and we can use that to help people to get better. That's maybe a unique story in that sense.
But I imagine every patient is unique when they come to you. And
absolutely.
That's an interesting story, yeah.
And there's research about outcomes and how chaplains can positively impact outcomes in healthcare. So.
Definitely. Yeah.
Dave, I have a question for you. So, on psychiatry, I took care of a lot of patients that had delusions of religion. Have you ever encountered a patient that may believe that they're a religious figure? And if so, how do you interact with them in a way that is good patient care without necessarily strengthening any delusions they may have?
Good question. Excellent question. I would say, first of all, it may be the case that actually having a chaplain interact with that patient at that time is not a good idea. For that reason that you mentioned, we can sometimes inadvertently fix that ideation that they're having that's causing trouble for them in their daily life. And that's the last thing we want to do, is help to fix or solidify what their belief system is that's part of an illness.
Because now you've become part of that story.
Right, right. So we have to be very careful. When I get paged to go see someone on a behavioral health unit, I do try to assess first what's going on with them. And if they're in a manic phase, or if they're actively delusional, paranoid, it depends, how strong their symptoms are at the time. But there are times when I'll say, I just don't think now is the best time, even though the patient is probably requesting to talk to a chaplain for that very reason. They think that the chaplain will come and understand what's going on with them, which we probably will, but not in the way that they're hoping.
Yeah.
So we have to be very careful with that, and we work closely with the people who are professionals in that regard so that we don't make things worse. But there are times when we can definitely bring comfort and people feel safe talking to us, and we're all good listeners. That's another skill, I guess, I didn't mention, but...
That's the goal.
Yeah, right. But yeah, it's a good question.
I have a question as well. Like you mentioned earlier how like some people can, be kind of scared to reach out to a chaplain because like judgment that they've received from religious figures before. Have you like encountered a situation where it's like, I don't know, the patient wasn't very like cooperative, I guess, when you came, like, or was there any like bad situations that happened, and how did you mitigate that?
If I understand the question correctly, if not, let me know. There are times when I get asked to go see someone, and as soon as I walk in the door and introduce myself, the person's like, no way, get out. Sometimes with a string of profanity. And that's fine. I'll say, okay. I might try to squeeze in a few words about how I can be of help to them just by listening. And, don't have to talk about God, don't have to talk about religion. But usually if it's a very strong negative reaction, I'll just say, okay, have a good day. And I'll turn and leave.
Feel better.
Yeah. But other times, somebody will say, oh, well, I'm not very religious. And I'll say, well, I'm not either. So we'll get along really well together. And that's true. I don't consider myself to be very religious. So we should maybe talk about, we don't have to now, but at some point, the difference between being religious and being spiritual.
Now seems like a great time.
Okay.
Go for it.
So as chaplains, we make that distinction. And again, I'll just speak for myself. I see kind of a continuum along those lines of spirituality. We can talk in a very secular sense about the human spirit and how the human spirit copes with being sick or being healthy or approaching the end of life or whatever the circumstance may be. So that's kind of my secular approach. Everyone has a human spirit. You can call that a personality or a character or whatever word you want to use, but I look at it as a spirit. We're a gestalt. There's more to us than just the sum of our parts. So people identify that in different ways. But then there are also people who do believe in God or a higher power or maybe nature in a much deeper sense than most of us do. And they consider themselves to be spiritual, but they're not attached to any institutional religion, no formal religion or religious tradition. So that's another sense of being spiritual, but not religious. And then there are people who do identify as being religious. The root word is religare. It's a Latin word that means to bind together. And that's part of an organized, institutional, formal religion, is there's a set of beliefs usually that bind people together into a religious tradition.
Right.
So some people identify as religious in that sense.
Our episode today is sponsored by Panacea Financial. It's a nationwide digital bank built for doctors by doctors. Panacea Financial is designed for medical students and residents, as it was founded by two doctors that were financially frustrated during their training. Thousands of doctors have used their PRN personal loan to avoid credit cards and use a better way to cover expenses for residency, relocation, or other life expenses. Panacea's PRN personal loan does not require a cosigner, has no minimum credit score requirement, and has interest rates starting at half of a typical credit card. They also offer a period of no or reduced payments on their PRN personal loan. So go to panaceafinancial.com/matchday to learn more about Panacea and get other helpful information on Matchday, residency transition. Panacea Financial is a division of Primis, member FDIC. Thanks for the support, Panacea. Let's get back to the podcast.
A thought I had when I started medical school was like, should I be leaving all of my spirituality at the door every time I step in? You know, in what ways is bringing religion going to disconnect me from my patients or stop me from making the right decision or the most medical decision? And I wanted to open this up to like any co-hosts. If you do prescribe to a spiritual or religious like belief, is how do you reconcile that part of your identity with the science that we're learning every day and with the very objective skills that we're learning every day? Do you guys keep those separate, or are there ways that you can integrate them into us as budding providers? And I think AJ would also have like as an M3, you probably have a lot of experience with this on the wards too.
Yeah, I actually did OB-GYN when Roe v. Wade was repealed last year.
Wow.
And part of that rotation was actually at a Catholic hospital where reproductive care wasn't as versatile. And so I do have some moments where I don't think that having certain religious beliefs are going to help patient care. And that's where ultimately I would draw the line personally with like, where does religion and providing healthcare, being a physician, I guess like where I need to say like, hey, if my beliefs don't allow me to provide you the care that is necessary for you, at the very minimum, I feel like it is the responsibility of that physician to at least refer the patient to somebody who is capable of doing that. Because ultimately, I took the Hippocratic Oath to take a responsibility for my patients. If my beliefs don't allow me to do that in good conscience, then the least I can do is direct them to someone who can give them the care without necessarily infringing on their personal beliefs or their conscience.
And not even just the care that's necessary for them, right? Like the care that they want to have, right? Like that choice that they're making.
Yeah, because when you start talking about necessary, I guess you're getting back to judgment. Like,
exactly, who decides that?
Who decides
right?
that? And yeah,
and because one person may believe that their God is the God that should dictate the way they live their life, doesn't necessarily mean that somebody else's God or gods would hold the same direction. And I'm not somebody who says that my way is the right way or my beliefs are the right beliefs. And therefore, I should not be the gatekeeper when it comes to this.
How does that idea sit with y'all?
I'll go ahead and push back. Why not? So we live in a pluralistic society. I personally believe that is a good thing, that people have a diversity of views and beliefs. I think a theme in my conversations on this podcast over the last year have been that we need a lot more humility in the sciences. We certainly need a lot more humility in the active science that is medicine, about really getting down to what is right and wrong and what is preference, right? Some things I think we're fairly comfortable saying these things would be wrong, right? Like not treating a patient who is in an emergent situation because we don't like the color of the shirt, whatever, for whatever reason, right? That would be wrong, right? Some other things we have to recognize as preference. For example, perhaps you are not comfortable providing a specific elective procedure because for you as the provider, you see that you can't see how the risks can't be ignored and the benefits aren't significant enough. And that is a preference for you as a provider. And for that procedure, maybe a different provider might do something else. Of course, we would be very comfortable saying, okay, maybe go talk to that other provider if you think that this is the procedure for you, right? But I personally, in good conscience, can't do that. But that is a gray area because it is a risk-benefit analysis, right? There is no right answer. And I think there are a lot of conversations that we can have around things that are religious concerns for a lot of people with healthcare that have evolved over the centuries and millennia that we've been practicing religion and medicine concurrently, that some issues I think we can settle, right? Like, I think most providers at this point, I would like to say all, but I know that's not true. Most providers are comfortable saying ectopic pregnancies are a danger to the patient. They have to be addressed. It will be an abortion, and there is no way to stop that from being an abortion. The embryo is growing in a part of the body that it cannot gestate, and it will cause the mother to die if we don't address this. There's just no other way around that, right? We understand I would call that more or less settled science at this point, right? But there are other conversations around even reproductive healthcare that people are going to have different opinions on that I think are well within the realm of preference and not right and wrong. And a lot of people like to push them into the right and wrong category, I think prematurely. And I think that we need to be careful of that. That said, we also need to make sure that we are not pushing in the opposite direction. We need to certainly let people have their preferences, but we need to be careful not to push any of our preferences into the right and wrong category prematurely.
I don't see where you're pushing back on this. I think you said the same thing.
Okay, so I'll give an example. This idea that providers can have preferences that for them are hard and fast, and that should be okay. A provider who thinks that euthanasia is not okay in this country, even though the ethics at this point are morally gray, and I think it's probably starting to shift toward it being more appropriate. It's not there yet. Our society as a whole is still not comfortable with it, but we're getting there, right? But that's a conversation where there's a lot more gray than people on either side want there to be. People in the this is definitely not okay camp and the people in this is definitely okay camp both want it to be a hard and fast yes or no.
So what you're pushing back on here is not what AJ said he would do in a certain situation. You're pushing back on the idea that some providers are willing to do certain things and other providers aren't willing to do certain things, and that they would, boy, I'm messing this up.
Let me try this one. I think that it is imperative that we make sure that providers are offered the opportunity to execute their own moral judgment. There are limits to that, the ectopic pregnancy being an example, but for the most part, I think that should be celebrated, not denigrated.
Okay.
I think one way that you could translate that into action, right, would be like, if you're not morally comfortable doing something, the basic necessity, like requirement that you are responsible to finish as a provider is getting them to that other provider who is willing to do it. Like, you can't just be like, all right, I'm not doing this, see you never. It's your role to find a provider, refer them to a provider who will be willing to do a certain procedure or follow up in the care that the patient wants, get them to that place, and give them the resources so that they can get to that provider. I think, right, I feel like no matter your background or how you feel about a certain patient's issue or what they want to do, that is your moral obligation. And I know that this is totally this whole discussion has a billion different ways that you can approach it. There's no right answer, but I don't know. Do you guys have any thoughts on that? Or
I do want to clarify that you do have an ethical and legal responsibility for patients that may be medically unstable or may not have a better option for care other than a treatment choice that, as a provider, you may not necessarily agree with. You're still obligated to provide them with a referral for care or transferring them to a different hospital, for example. And that's where we're running into all these problems in various states where we have bans on certain reproductive care, and now women have to be on death's doorstep before they can get an abortion. So that's something to be aware of, that you are required for the most part, but the legal landscape right now is also a very treacherous minefield, to say the least, of should you do this, can you do this, are you allowed to do this, so on and so forth.
And see, this is actually the perfect example, right? So if we have a provider who is the big example in our culture over the last couple of years from a religious perspective has been Jewish beliefs around life starts at birth, right? That is the theology in Judaism, at least how it's been shared in the online gestalt, I guess. This is how it works, and therefore these abortion bans are against their religious freedom, right? So if I, as a provider, am Jewish, that is not the case, but if I am, as a provider, am Jewish, and a patient comes in, and even though the law says X, I know that this patient is at risk if I don't do this, even if I'm breaking the law, I have a moral and a religious obligation to do it. I think that's the flip example that I'm trying to give here, is that like it doesn't really matter what everybody else's religious preferences are. What matters is a mix between what's right for the patient and what I see is right. And I kind of have to go with my gut on this one. And I know that puts me in a legally gray area. But I mean, I think at the end of the day, don't we want providers that are willing to do the ethical and moral thing? I don't know. It's kind of it's a hard point to be at.
And that also sounds like a very fine line, because if you put forth the argument that providers should do the ethical thing even if it goes against the law, which laws? Because I feel like that could get very dangerous very quickly based on a provider's preferences.
Yeah, it can.
So,
and it should be something that we are aware of when dealing with these types of issues, that it is entirely possible for there to be an immoral law. It is entirely possible for there to be somebody who is immoral outside of the law. Both are possible, right? So I think that the point is to recognize that morality and ethics and legality are three separate circles that sometimes overlap. And frankly, that's a hard understanding, and we're in a career where we get dangerously close to lines on that a lot by the necessity of what we do here. That's problematic. I don't know. Like, it's not going to get any easier. I think just recognizing that's the case is important. I don't know. I feel like you might have some thoughts on that, but...
Oh, I do. Just general ones, though. Just as far as language, I think what you're all talking about is provider conscience. Should I be forced to do something that goes against my moral judgment or my conscience? And that's a tension. It's a very real tension. And I encourage you to keep exploring that within yourselves. Where are those lines? Where are those boundaries? When you bump up against one, try to think of other ways that you can meet the need in front of you without violating your own conscience. But that can be, as far as referring people to providers who are comfortable providing certain services, that can be a privileged position. Here at a university academic center, medical center, it probably isn't so hard. But in a lot of rural areas, you might be the only provider.
Yeah, you might be referring them to somebody in a whole different town.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. So,
I get the argument that, since the cat's already out of the bag, abortion is just the easiest conversation to have, right? So if on one side...
Is it the easiest conversation?
The easiest example, I think, for this fight, right? So I would consider my religious and moral imperative to be making sure that mother is taken care of, right? If the mother is at risk, my moral obligation for my religious background would require that I take care of her and make sure that... I get it. Legality is a big issue in 31 states at this point, but I've got to make sure that she's taken care of. And if that means terminating the pregnancy, that means terminating the pregnancy. Whereas somebody else who might come from a different religious background, I can think of one very specifically, I won't say it, I don't want to cause any drama, but that might see the exact opposite, that their moral imperative, no matter what the law is to make sure that child or that fetus has every opportunity to survive, even at the risk of the mother's life, no matter what the laws around the situation might be. And here we are both playing in the same game, and the laws might move closer to my side or their side at any given moment, but our consciences aren't, and we're still in the same game, and there's a lot of tension there.
Shortcoats, we love to hear from you, no matter what it's about. So call us at 347-SHORT-CT with questions, shower thoughts, complaints about your situation, whatever you like. We'll talk about it on the show.
So I thought that we could find a way to get us thinking and get us in a provider's shoes in a situation like this, where spirituality or religion can influence a patient interaction, and a interaction that might be pretty common to us as we go through our medical education. So I thought we could do a little bit of a role play with a patient. So I adapted this from an article from the AMA Journal of Ethics, and so it's kind of like a pick your ending kind of game. So let's say we have a medical student. Miss Ervina, would you like to be your medical student? So you walk into my patient room.
Okay.
I have a major surgery scheduled the next day. Ervina, I'm really scared. Can you pray with me? What do you do? All right. I've got some options, but there's totally... Number 1 would be solution not otherwise stated. B, pray with the patient regardless of your own belief system. C, offer to invite a staff chaplain or spiritual liaison into the room. Or D, offer to get the patient a donut. What would you do?
The donut and then something else.
You know what could solve this situation? Some pastry.
I mean, pastry solves many problems, but
That's fair.
You know, it's worth considering.
Okay, in this situation, like I'm going to answer like as myself. So I consider myself religious, but you know, that might not be the same religion as the patient. So I think I would like pray with them, but then I would also, if I wasn't religious, then I would like offer my chaplain come in, or yeah, I guess it just depends on the situation too. But I think, yeah, it would go in line with like kind of my religious beliefs, so I think that's why it's a little easier for me to answer that part.
Okay.
Yeah.
Do you have any thoughts on that, or?
Yeah, does anyone else want to respond? AJ or Jeff?
Yeah, it's been a while since I took Mass 1, and I remember there being a right answer to this question, at least on a test.
Yeah.
That said,
Really?
That said, I personally would feel very comfortable with it. I would ask how they would want that to be, whether they wanted to voice out loud, if they wanted us to pray separately, silently, if they wanted me to be a mouthpiece to that, and kind of get an idea of what it should look like for them, for it to be as meaningful as possible for them. But it really, I think that I would feel very comfortable assisting them in that. Other people may not. I don't know what I'm supposed to be doing.
I feel like just finding more information about like how they pray is like one thing, and then you can kind of tailor it to like how you pray, and then kind of work through that way. Yeah. I think the right answer was a chaplain one. If I'm right, I don't know.
The reason that I would probably lean towards inviting a chaplain into the room would be, let's say that the patient's spiritual belief is not something, maybe you prescribe to a different religion, right? Let's say that they're like praying to the spaghetti monster, which is, I think there is an actual like religious group that does pray to the spaghetti monster. If you sit and you pray to the spaghetti monster with them, you may have done two things. Number one, maybe a little bit compromised your own self-faith in that situation. And number two, you may have violated the patient's trust as well by not pretending, but not taking their faith as seriously in the same way that they do it. Does that make sense? Am I saying that? Am I translating that forward?
Yeah, although I think that... why am I answering this question?
Well, you're on the show, that's why.
I don't know, like, as somebody who doesn't consider themselves of a particular faith or anything like that,
or somebody who finds themselves being asked by patients, really anything. I don't know. I don't know much about your career, but I haven't seen you in the hospital.
Patients don't really come by and, ask, Dave, what should I do?
But you're welcome to answer.
I think probably just being open and honest with the patient about what I see as my role here, what my beliefs are. I'm going to, if I was of a different faith, then I would say, let's both pray to the people that we believe in, or the deities we believe in, or whatever. I'm sure I would have thought ahead of time about this topic.
As you are doing.
Yes, and would come up with a much better way to put this, but... I mean, does that...
Oh, I think it's easy in these situations to be like, I have to come up with an answer immediately right now. But, I mean, communication is key, and that's what you're doing in that situation, right? You're verbalizing that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I guess that's kind of how I was, like, thinking of it, too. Like, the way I would approach it.
I guess for me, the difference would be, and I recognize that this puts me in a minority... I'm incredibly heterodox.
You're used to be.
I am. I'm an interesting enigma when it comes to many topics, and I'm comfortable with that. But I do not mean this as a pejorative, but I feel like a lot of religious people are reasonably rigid in their theology, right, in their approach to their relationship with deity. There's nothing wrong with that per se. I am less so and more comfortable with adapting somebody else's approach to deity for the situation, if that's what's going to be meaningful for them. And I don't think that it detracts anything from how I have a relationship with deity. So for that reason, I would still feel very comfortable, but also understanding that's the case for a lot of people, that it isn't easy to do that adaptation without feeling like you're compromising or doing something falsely. I can understand why for most people that might not be the right answer, and that's also okay.
That's a great point. This article talked about that being a thing of like, oh, you're compromising your own self identity, but even that is on a spectrum, right?
Yeah.
I think that's a great point. Yeah.
I just have to say there shouldn't be one right answer.
That's fair, yeah.
I'll take that up with the course coordinator.
Yeah.
It's hard to write a test.
Yeah.
I guess all of the above is always
Always click all of them.
Yeah.
Sometimes they're like accept, and then it's like one off the wall thing, and like all the rest of them are options. But
yeah, I mean, the lecture that we gave in the fall listed several options. Mm-hmm. Not saying that any one of them is really preferable to the others.
And it's entirely possible that was the question, like how they worded it on the test. I just remember there actually being a question about it. So
okay.
I was like, it seems like there might have been a right answer here. But
okay.
So
yeah, no, there's
David's like, I'm going to have words with you.
So say you do offer to invite a chaplain, and the patient says, but the chaplain isn't the one doing the surgery. You guys are. Why won't you pray with me? What do you do? A. Explain that you do not prescribe to the same religious beliefs and leave the room. B. Tell the
miss me with that, sir.
B. Explain that you don't prescribe to the same beliefs and then ask, I see you're scared. Tell me more about your fears. C. Explain that you don't prescribe to the same beliefs but would be happy to sit in silence while they pray. Or D. Something else.
Donut.
Can't be taken off the table.
Potentially.
Okay, I got really confused for a second.
I actually googled. I actually googled that. I was like, is
do
prescribed
you write a prescription for the same beliefs?
for the donut?
See, my immediate thought would be, well, I also am not going to be performing the surgeries. As a medical student, that's not
Fair. I'm going to be standing.
Trust me, you don't want me to be involved in that part. But yeah, I'll let you guys answer before I give.
Rude.
I've actually had patients before that are religious and ask my resident. When I was on surgery, I was paired up with a resident on vascular who actually is very deeply religious and wants to do like global surgery and do missionary work. And patients from time to time would ask to pray, and he would pray with them, but they also lined up in their beliefs most of the time, which ended up being in the favor of the patient. When it comes to that situation where like things line up, it's great, and the patient does feel very empowered after. But I haven't necessarily witnessed the other where like the patient may be Muslim and the team might not have a Muslim person on it. So what do you do then? And if they refuse to, or if they want to have you pray with them, what do you do? And being somebody who lives in a state where most people wouldn't line up with, like I grew up Muslim, I was raised Muslim, I wouldn't know necessarily what to do other than I'm here to listen. And that's honestly a kindness that I think should be offered no matter what. It's just having a listening ear.
See, I think for me, so there's this idea, it's called the narcissism of small differences. Anybody ever heard this phrase before?
No.
Okay. I feel like I'm a dictionary. That's my job on this show. Is to bring up new words. And
that's why I like having you here, because then it elevates it from Dave just being like, I don't know.
Yeah, sitting next to the prescribed girls. So.
Yeah, I wasn't going to say anything, but I'm glad we got that figured out. So the narcissism of small differences is this idea that you might agree with somebody on 99% of the things, but you pick that 1 to 5% of things that you disagree on, and that's where you're going to make your fight. In part, it's because it's easier to argue with somebody that you mostly agree with, so that you can stake out your ideological purity. It's also, you tend to get more points by fighting for people on your own side, right? But I notice this a lot in religion. It's very common, right? Christianity, Islam, and Judaism are the 3 largest faiths on the planet. Christianity and Islam representing a full, 3/4 of the planet, at least on paper. There's a lot that they have in common, but we're going to fight over the things that they don't, right? Instead, I like to do what I've affectionately referred to as the humility of small similarities. If there's something in common, focus on that. And if somebody is praying to a deity, okay, we've got that in common. I do that too, right? And so our understanding of what that deity looks like or even acts like might be different, but the idea that we're appealing to something larger than ourselves in a moment when we feel like we need some extra help, boy, howdy, can I understand. Mm-hmm. And I can be here for you during that moment. And that, I think, kind of trumps all of those other concerns that, well, we have a different idea of what the most important day of the week might be, or our specific religious practices, or even the name that we would prefer to call our deity. That doesn't matter. What matters is right now, we're feeling small and we need some help, and I can understand that feeling and I can be with you here for that. So,
and I'd hope that's something that anyone can relate to, even if you don't prescribe to any deity, right?
Yeah.
Or ascribe.
That was fun. I thought you were going with the continuity there. It was nice. I think prescribe is okay, prescribe is not. I don't know.
Okay.
Can't be a dictionary all the time. Sorry, guys.
Listeners, if you want to tell Hend that she's wrong about her word choice, you know what to do. Send an email to theshortcoats@gmail.com. I will share it with her.
Glad I can help increase engagement. Does anyone have any?
I'd just like to follow up. That was very well said, Jeff. That, that's the most important thing, is being present, being there for someone who's feeling very vulnerable in that situation, and trying to meet the need as best you can in a way that's not terribly uncomfortable for you, but will be meaningful to the patient.
I might even suggest, going back to the original question, if I remember it correctly, maybe the appropriate thing to do if you're not feeling super comfortable with it is, let me grab the chaplain, and they say, well, he's not going to be there, you are. You say, well, I'm happy to stay in here with the chaplain. I'm inexperienced at this, and I want to learn, and I want to be able to meet your needs, so I'm happy to be here with you, but I think the chaplain will help us really make sure that all of your needs are met in this way. That way you're still engaged, and frankly, you're going to learn a lot from the experience, which should be good for you as a provider in the future, but you're still making sure their needs are met, not by somebody who's just, an M3 still wet behind the ears over here, that barely knows anything. So that might also be a solution, a compromise of sorts.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's, first, addressing, their fears, and then, going from there, and a lot of people, prior to, we had that lecture, I had no idea what a chaplain did, too, in the hospital, so, and my assumption is that maybe, a lot of patients don't know either, so I guess explaining that role is, could help with understanding.
That's a great point.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, the reality is, though, you probably have limited time, and to get a chaplain there right away might be a challenge.
Okay.
So that might be the ideal, to have a chaplain come in, but I encourage you to keep thinking about how you would handle those situations on your own as well. That's, in all likelihood, you'll have to at some point.
Yeah, maybe as a medical student, you might have more flexibility to be okay, we'll happy to do what Jeff said, but maybe at a later time when the chaplain is available. But yeah, I think that makes sense that a doctor or some other provider may not be as flexible or be able to be as flexible to do that.
I guess
a perfect solution isn't available. Not in medicine. Surely not.
Yeah, I've noticed that life in general tends to not achieve that. I wanted to ask one more question before I let everybody go. And that is, as people of science, is there a conflict for you personally between the scientific nature of medicine and the faith that you subscribe to? So medicine requires evidence, and faith requires faith. And the two, to me, seem to oppose each other, or at least be in tension. Anybody want to talk about that?
I could talk about that for another episode. Literally like 2 hours or something.
It's a big question.
Sorry, I thought this would be simple.
I can just a short answer then. Maybe this will be a 2-parter. Maybe in the future we'll do another episode.
Okay, all right.
Yeah, that'll keep the crowd pleased, I hope. So my general thought is, I think that I might be, at least in this room, unique in that I ascribe to a faith that
side eye.
Wow.
I saw that. Oh my god.
I was mostly at AJ actually. So has a tenet of our faith that all truth will be circumscribed into one great whole. So any truth that we find, we claim it. And I find that to be an incredibly empowering tenet of faith. And I get the idea that maybe there is a little bit of tension between empirical evidence for science and a more spiritual-based evidence, but certainly less empirical evidence, I guess, for the crowd, for religious or spiritual experiences. Apart from the fact that I have so many contradictions in myself already as a human being, that like that divine tension stretches me in the best of ways. I find that to be invigorating, not destructive. But as a whole, I think that it's part of it's a religious imperative for me to find out more truth, more scientific truth, because that is my way of interacting with deity, of saying, let me understand, or even maybe glorify would be a word that we'd find in a religious community. Let me glorify this deity by understanding the beauty that is the universe around us. And so for me, there isn't really a conflict as much as it's like those waves that I was talking about. They amplify one another. They're constructive for me.
I think personally, the way I'm also Muslim, and the way I kind of approach kind of my faith is like asking questions is part of the faith, like questioning the things that you are told either in like a religious sense or in science. That's what science is. It's questioning, right? I mean, you're kind of doing the same thing in both of those roles. That's a very short answer, but yeah, just to add on to Jeff's point. Yeah.
Well, we may have to leave it there. You guys have something you need to get to.
Yeah, unfortunately.
Yeah.
Oh, we can make it a 2-parter. We'll be back.
We'll think about that. Yeah,
listeners, let them know. Let us know if you want to hear more.
Yeah. Well, that's our show. Hend, thanks for producing the show with me today.
Thank you, everyone, for coming.
Yeah, and David, AJ, Jeff, Ervina, thanks for joining us.
Yeah, of course. And remember, everybody, today's episode was brought to you by words. Meanings are made up and definitions don't matter.
And what kind of
I ascribe to this.
And what kind of apocrypha would I be promulgating if I didn't thank you, Shortcoats, for making us a part of your week? If you're new and you like what you heard today, follow the show wherever fine podcasts are available, like Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, and YouTube. Thank you to this week's editor, AJ Chowdhury. The show is made possible by a generous donation by Carver College of Medicine Student Government and ongoing support from the Writing and Humanities program. Our music is by Dr. Vox and Catmosphere. I'm Dave Etler saying don't let the bastards get you down. Talk to you in 1 week. Hi, Shortcoats. Look, life in medical education, life in America, life in the world is often difficult. And I often wish I could help. All I have is this podcast, but in my wildest dreams, you have the support you need to lead a life of your choosing. You deserve to be happy, healthy, and successful in whatever ways you define those words. So if you need support because you've experienced racism, discrimination, harassment, mental health crises, I want you to be able to get the help that you need. And so I'm going to put some links in the show notes to some resources that you can use. But the bottom line is that for what it's worth, I see you. I know you're out there. I wish I could do more. Maybe I can in ways that I don't understand yet or know about. But I see you, and I'm glad you're here, and other people are too. This Short Code podcast is a proud member of the MedEd Media Network. Inspiration, information, and guidance on your journey to medical school and beyond at mededmedia.com.